My name is Candy. I'm 32, a risk analyst in Seattle, and my job is to predict disasters. But not a single report I'd written had prepared me for that day. I usually never answer a phone if the number I don't recognize is the norm. Big city survival rules, you know. But that time, something clicked inside me, an icy spark of panic that made my heart skip a beat. I answered. "Candy, this is Henderson from the family bank." The senior manager's voice, usually velvety calm, was taut as a string. I instinctively sank back into my chair, and his next sentence hit me in the gut, taking the air out of me. "Your mother is in the main branch right now. Your sister Elizabeth is with her. They are demanding the immediate liquidation of the entire family trust." The world went silent. My ears rang. Because it wasn't just a lie, it was a physical impossibility. "This can't be." My own voice sounded strange. I forced it to be level. "My mother is in the air. I just drove her to the airport myself. She's flying to Paris." There was a heavy, echoing pause on the other end of the line. I could hear his controlled breathing. Then he lowered his voice, and it rang not with professional politeness, but with genuine anxiety. "Miss Candy, the woman standing before me is the spitting image of your mother. She has all the documents in her hands, passport, powers of attorney, everything. I cannot allow the procedure to proceed without your personal presence. You need to come. Now. The situation is becoming critical." I clutched the phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My heart was pounding somewhere in my throat, wild and thunderous. And through this pounding, a single, crystal clear and chilling thought emerged. Someone was very methodically, brick by brick, dismantling my life. And I, a threat analyst, didn't even notice how I was surrounded. But before we move further into this frightening quagmire, let's take a short break. If stories where reality cracks make your heart beat faster, please support me by subscribing and liking. And tell me in the comments where you're watching this video. It's important for me to feel your support, because the hardest part is yet to come. Just 2 hours ago, the International Terminal, Seattle-Tacoma Airport. I watched her slender back in a light coat recede. Mom walked toward security with a quiet, restrained excitement. She held her passport so tightly, as if it weren't just a document, but a key to another, better life. A lump formed in my throat when she turned around one last time and waved before disappearing into the stream of travelers. Elizabeth was driving then, my older sister. She took charge of everything, loading the luggage, navigating, constantly glancing at her phone screen, checking the flight status. "Everything's fine, everything's on schedule," she'd say matter-of-factly. Now I understand. Her behavior wasn't concern, it was a clear plan. The way she nervously glanced at her watch, gently but firmly nudging Mom toward the boarding gate, that wasn't sisterly care, it was haste. She needed Mom out of my sight as soon as possible, and the sooner, the better. Even at our farewell breakfast, there was something in the air. Mom was strangely distant. She answered questions about the route in Paris with memorized short phrases, and she avoided looking me in the eye. That direct, open gaze that always existed between us, as if she were afraid I'd read in it the terrible secret they were engaged in. And then I returned to my quiet, sunny living room. I tried to bury my nose in the reports, to regain a sense of control. And then Henderson's phone rang. I sat staring at the wall, in complete, utter disbelief. The physical laws of my world had just crumbled to dust. My brain, desperately trying to stitch together a shattered reality, juxtaposed 2 images. Mom in the cabin of an Airbus over the ocean, and Mom in the marble lobby of a bank in downtown Seattle. 2 different people. One, impossible. But the cold, steely seriousness in Mr. Henderson's voice left no doubt. He was right. I was wrong. All this time, I had been blind. I found myself gripping the edge of my mahogany desk so tightly, my knuckles turned white. My analytical mind, the one that builds models and calculates risks, desperately searched for a glitch in the algorithm. Where was the error? Where was the precise moment where reality split in two? There had to be a logical reason, a discrepancy, something. But every time I tried to grasp at that straw, another memory would flash before my eyes. Elizabeth's smug, businesslike expression at the airport. It haunted me like an obsession. And then it dawned on me. A sickening, chilling stroke of insight. Mom never scanned her boarding pass. Not in front of me. Because Elizabeth, my sweet sister, insisted on walking her further, right to the security entrance, where I, a mere escort, was no longer allowed. "I'll help, don't worry," she said. And I, foolishly, believed her. The picture came together, clear and merciless. They simply waited until my car disappeared around the corner. And then they turned around and walked out of the terminal. Not to the plane, to the taxi, and straight to the city center to put their real plan into action. I literally shook. I imagined them riding in that car, Mom huddled by the window, and Elizabeth? She was probably laughing at how easily they'd tricked me, how cleverly they'd staged that performance with the tickets and suitcases. The blood rushed to my temples, a rage, sharp and primal, the likes of which I'd never known in my life. Elizabeth, the eternal problem, the endless credit card debt, one stupid, brilliant business venture after another. And Mom. Mom always pulled her out, paid her off, said, "She's family," and turned a blind eye to how it was ripping apart our shared budget. I heard my father, even in life, tell her, sternly and wearily, "The trust is a safety net for all of us. It's not a personal fund for your eldest daughter and her endless failures." And there it was, the realization. Mom wasn't just turning a blind eye. She was now an active participant. She was helping Elizabeth drain dry what was supposed to protect us all. This wasn't disappointment anymore. This was betrayal. Deep, personal, leaving a void in her chest far more terrible than any financial hole. I grabbed the keys. My hand instinctively reached for the door. I needed to be there. Now, before the last thing that connected our family slipped right through my nose, turning into cash in my greedy sister's purse. Exactly 30 minutes later, I squeezed the car into the crowded parking lot outside the main branch. My hands were still shaking, and I sat there for a second, trying to compose myself. Then I stepped out and headed for the entrance. Wide glass doors, the cool, almost sterile air of the lobby hit me in the face, but it couldn't extinguish the fire of anger and disbelief burning inside me. My gaze darted around the room and immediately found them. My heart sank. I recoiled, instinctively taking cover behind a massive marble column. From here, from my hiding place, I could see everything. The back of my mother's head. That same hairstyle, that same blouse she'd been wearing at the airport. No Paris. This whole journey was just a farce, a meticulously orchestrated performance for one spectator. For me. And next to her was Elizabeth. She leaned over the dark wood counter, her entire posture screaming impatience and aggression. She was like a string ready to snap. Her eyes, like those of a cornered animal, darted around the room. Her fingers fiddled incessantly with the end of an expensive silk scarf. She pushed papers toward Mom, whispering insistently, and when the clerk turned back to the monitor, her false nail tapped sharply, angrily, against the polished surface. Tap, 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 like a countdown to the final seconds. The silence in the premium service area was deafening. But around their table hung a tension so thick, so dense, it felt almost palpable. Even the other customers, pretending to study the contracts, stole glances their way. And then I saw my mother, slowly, as if forced, reach for the massive gold pen the clerk held out to her. Her movements were heavy, as if the pen weighed 100 kilograms, as if the entire weight of this deception rested on her shoulders. I held my breath, shifting slightly to hear better, and through the hum of the air conditioners and the muffled conversations, I finally caught snatches of their voices. Their voices, muffled but distinct, and the first fragment of a phrase I heard made my blood run cold again. I crouched behind a column, every muscle in my body tense to the limit. And then I heard it, Elizabeth's voice, low and hard as a blade, sent an icy shiver down my spine. She leaned toward Mom, her lips almost touching my ear, and hissed with such a cold smile that I felt sick. "Come on, Mom, sign quickly. I've checked everything. This little thing Candy won't even suspect until it's too late." A little thing. This Candy. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. To her, I wasn't a sister. I was a nuisance, an annoying obstacle to the money, one that simply had to be circumvented. And Mom? God, Mom. She froze. The pen hovered in midair, a centimeter from the fateful line. Her whole hand trembled, and I saw the ink on the tip of the pen waver dangerously. And from her chest came a whisper so weak, so broken, that I barely made out the words. "I'm so ashamed. To do this behind her back, this is the last thing their father left them both." For a moment, a wild, irrational hope flared within me. A spark. Now she'll wake up. She'll throw down that stupid pen, turn around and tell Elizabeth to get the hell out. Maternal instinct, duty, conscience, whatever. But the hope lasted only a second. Elizabeth leaned even closer. Her face was so close to Mom's that it seemed she might bite it. Her eyes narrowed to 2 cold, predatory slits. There was nothing in them but pure, concentrated greed. "She's already made, Mom. She doesn't need that money. Not like me," she breathed. Her voice was sweet as syrup, poisonous as cyanide. She reached out and grabbed Mom's wrist. It wasn't support. It was a grab, hard, merciless. And she began to guide my mother's trembling hand, to move the pen toward the bottom of the document. I watched as the tip of the pen finally touched the paper. As the first curl of the signature was written, it was slow, painful. Each stroke felt like a cut on the skin. It was like someone personally signing your death warrant. 32 years of trust, love, shared memories, all erased with those few strokes of ink. I stood behind the column paralyzed. My lungs felt like lead. And this betrayal, finally, didn't just hit me. It seeped into my very soul, filling every cell with cold, sticky mud. The woman who sheltered me from thunderstorms as a child. The girl with whom we whispered at night under the covers about first love. They were now here, in the light of day, in this respectable bank, calmly robbing me. Robbing us. Elizabeth began to gather up the signed papers. A smile blossomed on her face. Triumphant, predatory, smug. That expression made me physically want to scream, to tear everything around me to shreds. My father was right. He'd always been right about her. And I was blind. I wanted to believe in family so much that I refused to see the snake coiled on my pillow. The silence of the bank, that smell of money and stability, seemed to mock me. But I clenched my teeth. No, not now. What I needed now was not to rage, but to think, coldly and clearly. I needed to stay in the shadows and gather evidence, to dismantle their beautiful, vile lies, piece by piece. I spent the next 15 minutes in that shadow. My mind, finally freed from the grip of shock, began to work feverishly. I needed help, professional help, and now. With fingers trembling with rage and still in pain, I fished my phone out of my pocket. The first call was to Connor, my lawyer. He handled all of my father's affairs. He knew the history of our trust like the back of his hand. He answered almost immediately. "Connor, listen, it's urgent," I whispered, turning away to the cold marble. "They're here, at the bank. Mom and Elizabeth. They just signed something to dismantle the entire trust. This whole trip to Paris was a performance to calm me down. They're 30 feet away." As I spoke, my eyes never left them. Elizabeth circled Mom like a vulture, already anticipating victory. Little did she know that her performance already had a second, invisible director. The second message was to Skylar, my friend, a genius with numbers and technology. If something leaves a trace online, she'll find it. Sky, SOS. I need help. Mom and Lisa are robbing the family trust. It's all a lie. Skylar responded instantly, as if she'd been waiting. Con, give me screenshots of everything. The booking code, the itinerary she sent you, everything you have. I'll sort it out. I frantically started forwarding her every evidence I had of Mom's flight. Every email, every text message. Let Skylar see the same picture I saw. While Elizabeth triumphed at the counter, I, invisible, was already methodically unearthing the foundations of their farce. A few minutes later, my phone shuddered quietly. Skylar's name and a series of screenshots flashed on the screen. They burned like an indictment, confirming my worst suspicions. Skyle sent a voicemail, and her voice in the headphones was sharp and precise, like a scalpel. Candy, listen. This ticket to Paris is a fake, a complete waste. It was returned 10 minutes after you left the airport. The plane hadn't even started landing, and they'd already returned their tickets. It was a complete show. Every word she said hit me like a hammer. Nausea rose in my throat, thick, bitter. Yes, indeed, they were using the airport like a theatrical stage, and I was the only unsuspecting spectator. While I was driving home, thinking about Mom drinking coffee on the Champs-Élysées, they were probably splashing champagne in a taxi, celebrating how skillfully they'd tricked me. Before I could process this blow, the phone rang. Connor. And his news was even more terrifying. Candy, this is more serious than we thought. His voice was devoid of any emotion, just a steely, professional grip. I've flagged the transaction. Elizabeth, she gave the bank a power of attorney this morning, in your name, with your notarized signature. It gives her the right to manage the trust on your behalf. The world around me swam. An icy chill, as if from the very depths of the earth, rose up my legs, paralyzing my entire body. This wasn't just greed anymore, not just manipulating my mother. This was a criminal offense. My own sister forged my signature, crossed a line beyond which there was no turning back. Your job now is to stay away and not move, Connor continued, and his sternness worked on me like valerian. This isn't a family dispute anymore. This is organized fraud and identity theft. Do you understand? I understood, with every cell in my body. I took a deep breath, and my hand automatically reached for the phone. I turned on the camera, carefully aiming the lens from behind the column. I needed proof, not digital, but live. The recording showed everything. Elizabeth, with a predatory, commanding gesture, grabbing my mother's trembling hand and guiding it. The way my mother froze, her shoulders hunched, her posture one solid no, refusing to let out. This video wasn't just evidence. It was the final nail in their own coffin. It screamed coercion, manipulation, a complete lack of goodwill. I watched as the clerk picked up a stack of signed papers and headed to the back office. To Mr. Henderson. He was waiting for my signal. The trap they had so carefully prepared for me was now quietly closing around them. The silence in the hallway became deafening, unbearable. I waited, and I knew the next few minutes would break our family's back forever. But a strange calm descended upon me. I didn't care. They had made their choice. Let them answer for it now. My father had built this life, this legacy, drop by drop with honest labor. And I won't let his memory be trampled beneath the greedy heels of someone who's never known what an honestly earned dollar is. Another 10 minutes passed, and a decision ripened within me, a final, desperate test. I pulled out my phone and dialed Elizabeth's number. I watched from my hiding place as she fussily reached into her designer handbag. The phone vibrated in her hand, and I saw her face transform in real time. The predatory, focused mask cracked and slipped, and in its place, in a second, an expression of sweet, strained innocence appeared. She accepted the challenge. She answered, and that voice, cheerful, sweet as syrup, made my skin crawl with pure physical revulsion. I knew what lay behind that melody. I saw it with my own eyes. She leaned casually against the counter, adopting the pose of a woman who hadn't a single care in the world. And she began to lie. It was as easy and natural as if she were breathing. "Candy, honey, calm down. Mom's probably asleep on the plane already, so let her rest," she said, her eyes, cold and empty, sweeping across the hall. There was no trace of regret in them, only a chilling calculation. She continued, describing how she had just finished cleaning the house and was now planning to enjoy a quiet evening after such an emotional morning at the airport. It was unbearable to listen to. It was the most horrific, the most disgusting display of hypocrisy I could imagine. She stood a meter away from her victim, a man she claimed wasn't even on the continent, and cooed into the phone as if nothing had happened. I was silent. I simply held the phone to my ear, letting every false intonation burn a hole in my mind, letting the weight of this betrayal finally crush the last vestiges of illusion. Then, without a word, I hung up and immediately dialed another number, Mom's. I saw it all. The sharp, familiar ringtone of her call pierced the silence of the high-ceilinged hallway. Mom jerked in her chair as if she'd been electrocuted. Her face turned sallow, ashen. She stared at the screen where my name was flashing with such horror as if she'd seen a ghost. Wide, panic-filled eyes stared at Elizabeth. Her hands shook so violently that the phone slipped from her fingers and almost crashed to the marble floor. She barely caught it, and instead of answering, her fingers slammed in horror on the red button. Reject. She frantically shoved the phone deep into her coat pocket, and I saw her chest heave with panicked, shallow breaths. I remained in the shadows, an invisible witness, and I saw how a quiet, feverish whisper began between them. The wall of lies they had so carefully constructed began to crack, and they sensed it. "It's her. She's calling me, Lisa," Mom hissed, and her whisper, thick with horror and belated guilt, reached me. "If she finds out I'm not in Paris, we're lost. We'll be destroyed. We'll be destroyed. Not, I hurt her. Not, what have we done? But we'll be destroyed." In that moment, something in me finally died. Her fear wasn't for my broken heart, but for their own skin. It was unbearably clear. Elizabeth only dug her fingers into her mother's hand, her face twisted in irritation and anger. She whispered something sharply in response, trying to pull her mother back into line with her plan. She was like a trainer whose predatory dog had suddenly become stubborn. It was excruciating to watch. It wasn't remorse, but panicked confusion. She was entangled in her own web, torn between the greed of one daughter and the inevitable wrath of the other, whom she had just betrayed. Elizabeth leaned over again and whispered something aggressive and rapid in her mother's ear. She was probably injecting more lies. "It's all for the best. We just have to finish. She won't have time." A pathetic, disgusting sight. Two grown women scurrying like pickpockets in this temple of financial respectability, which embodied the very legacy they were so eager to steal. And in that moment, a strange, crystal-clear calm washed over me. I watched their struggle and understood. These people were not my family. They were strangers, enemies in familiar faces. That elegant spectacle at the airport had given way to this dirty, feverish bustle at the bank counter. I clutched my phone tighter. It now contained a recording. There were screenshots from Skylar. There were facts from Connor. The plan to devastate my future was here, in the palm of my hand. Incontrovertible evidence. Their scam would never see the light of day. Never. "The show is over," I whispered to myself, and my voice was steely. Such cold, unwavering determination that I surprised myself. Enough hiding, enough watching. Time to take the stage. Exactly 30 minutes after I'd accumulated a whole collection of their downfalls on my phone, I stepped out from behind the marble column. My path led straight to the premium service counter. My heels beat a precise, inexorable rhythm on the polished floor. The sound echoed under the high ceilings, like a clock striking the final seconds of their lie. The bank employees looked up from their monitors, surprised. Elizabeth was whispering something urgently to the teller when she sensed my approach. She turned, and I saw her face turn into a mask. The smug confidence slipped away like bad makeup, revealing a deathly, chalky pallor beneath. The healthy glow vanished without a trace. A sharp, strangled sound echoed nearby. Mom's sigh, pure, undiluted horror. The heavy gold pen slipped from her weakened fingers. It fell to the floor with a dull thud, and behind it, as if in slow motion, came the entire stack of legal files. The papers fanned out, white sheets on the dark marble, the perfect symbol of the chaos they had created. I stopped 2 steps away, crossing my arms over my chest. I simply watched them try to gather their crumbling dignity. The air around me turned icy, as if a wind had blown into the room from the mountain peaks. My voice, when I spoke, was just as cold. It seemed to freeze every molecule between us. Tell me, Mom, am I a daughter to you, or just a living ATM, created to pay for her endless failures? She looked up at me. Her eyes were full of tears, her lips trembling. She tried to say something, to force an excuse, but only croaks came out. Why? Why was she right now helping one daughter rob another of her future? Elizabeth was the first to come to her senses. She drew herself up to her full height, trying to replace her primal fear with puffed up, unjustified anger. Her hands clenched into fists, white with tension. "Mom's just making a choice," she blurted out, her voice shaking. "She believes you're already strong, that you can handle it without this money. You don't need it." I didn't even glance at her. Instead of answering, I placed my phone on the polished counter. The digital evidence lay there, a bright, undeniable stain. A screenshot of the ticket refund. The time, 10 minutes after I left the airport. Flight AF305 to Paris was canceled with a full refund exactly 1 hour and 42 minutes ago, came the voice in the silence. Nobody flew anywhere. Then I swiped my finger across the screen, bringing up the next image, a legal notice from Connor about the forged power of attorney. The cashier, pale as a sheet, pushed the entire stack of documents away from Elizabeth in one motion, as if they were contaminated. Mom began to sob quietly, burying her face in her hands. It slipped through my fingers. I just wanted to help her start over. "You already have everything, Candy. You have a career." It was pathetic and disgusting. It wasn't an excuse. It was merely the rotten root of the very same prejudice that had poisoned our family for all the years of my adult life. "You already have everything," Elizabeth suddenly roared, her voice breaking into a shrill, hysterical note. A wild mixture of greed, despair, and deep-seated resentment raged within it. "Why can't you just give me a chance? One chance to fix everything?" She looked at me, and in her eyes, finally, there was nothing left but raw, naked hatred. That was the truth. She never loved me. To her, I had always been nothing but a rival, a competitor for love, attention, and now, money. The bank guard took a few cautious steps toward us. Elizabeth's voice caught the attention of the entire room. I looked her straight in the eye, without blinking. And in that moment, I felt such absolute, such pure clarity that it almost became easy. "I don't negotiate with thieves," I said quietly, but every word sounded like the crack of a whip. Even if those thieves turned out to be people with whom I shared the same blood. Elizabeth flinched, as if I'd actually slapped her in the face. My words made her stagger back. Mama reached out to me. Her face was contorted with such pain, such remorse, that it seemed ready to crumble. But I retreated, a step back. Her touch now would be an insult, a desecration of the pain they inflicted on me. "Candy, please understand." Her voice was hoarse with despair. "Your sister, she would lose everything she has. We should have intervened." Every word she uttered was a nail in the coffin of her own guilt. She didn't apologize for the deception. She justified it. Ready to sacrifice my trust, the memory of my father, our shared future, anything, so that her beloved, eternally failing child wouldn't feel the consequences of her own idiotic actions. The silence that followed her plea was thick and heavy. 32 years of unspoken pain floated within it, 32 years of illusions that had now burst like a soap bubble, leaving behind only bitter, soapy water. My family. It was a myth, a beautiful fairy tale, I told myself. I turned away from them, from their tear-stained, distorted faces. My gaze darted to the massive door of Mr. Henderson's office. The conversations were over. Now it was time for a different language, the language of laws and consequences. Exactly 10 minutes after all this filth had spilled onto the polished marble of the lobby, they entered the bank. Detective Miller and 2 other investigators. Their appearance, calm and businesslike, instantly changed the atmosphere. This was no longer a family scandal. This was a crime scene. They began working quietly and methodically, cordoning off the area, removing documents from the counter, packing them in special bags. My notes, screenshots from Skylar, everything was becoming evidence. And then Elizabeth seemed to break through. She understood where this was all heading. And then it began. "It's her!" Her finger trembled, pointing at her mother. "This was all her idea. She forced me. She threatened me. I knew nothing." It was the most cowardly, the most vile act imaginable. To shift all the blame onto the aging, broken woman who had been her shield her entire life. I watched this pathetic attempt to save her own skin, and my mouth tasted like copper. I silently handed Detective Miller my phone. All the evidence was there, clear, crisp, irrefutable. Let him listen. Let him see who was really pulling the strings. "Mom. God, Mom." Her body seemed to collapse in on itself when she heard her eldest daughter's words. The one she had always protected was now so easily setting her up for criminal charges. She leaned against the counter, dropped her head into her hands, and her shoulders shook with silent, terrible sobs. It was grief not from exposure, but from the final, irrevocable betrayal, from the realization of what blind love had turned her into. And Elizabeth continued to scream. She screamed about pressure, about manipulation, portraying herself as an innocent victim. The spectacle was so repulsive that even the seasoned investigators exchanged glances of silent contempt. Detective Miller, having examined the forged power of attorney, finally raised his head. His gaze, heavy and implacable, fell on Elizabeth. "Elizabeth," his voice sounded like a gong, drowning out her babble, "you are being held on suspicion of grand fraud and document forgery. The evidence against you is compelling, and your attempts to shift the blame onto a vulnerable person," he nodded toward Mom, "will only worsen your position in court." And then Mom began to sob for real, heavily, heartbreakingly, with such a sense of utter collapse that it seemed the sound was coming from the very depths of the earth. "What have I done?" she sobbed, staring into space with confused, wet eyes. "How could I lose everything, everything I hold dear, for one monstrous lie?" The guilt in her voice was so overwhelming that it seemed to fill the entire room. She stretched her arms into the void, seeking support that no longer existed. I stood a few steps away, just a few feet, but between us lay a chasm that nothing could fill. I looked at her hunched back, listened to her sobs, and felt nothing. Nothing but an icy, utter emptiness. I couldn't find the strength in my heart to offer her forgiveness. It simply wasn't there. I looked at this woman, my mother, and finally saw the whole chain clearly. Her endless concessions, her blind preference. They didn't just deprive me. They created a monster. They nurtured in Elizabeth the belief that she could take everything without taking responsibility. And now this monster, like in a scary fairy tale, has turned around to devour its creator. "It's too late for regret now," I said, my voice so icy and precise that even Detective Miller glanced at me. "Too late to weep for your cruel and calculating partiality when the consequences have finally knocked on your door. My forgiveness cannot be bought with tears, not after months of secret conspiracies to erase me from my father's legacy." Elizabeth, pale and distorted with anger, cast me one last venomous glance, filled with pure resentment, as if I had stolen something from her, and was led away to the back office for questioning. The bank lobby gradually quieted, returning to its usual sterile order. But I knew, for the three of us, there was no turning back. It had been gone since that morning. I signed the witness statement with a firm, unwavering hand, and I felt a strange, almost dizzying relief. A burden. The heavy, invisible burden of guarding their secrets, maintaining the facade of a close-knit family. It finally lifted from my shoulders. I could breathe deeply, even if the air around me was bitter with ash. A week passed. That icy silence of the bank lobby was replaced by the cold, inexorable mechanisms of the law. The Washington legal system was handing down its verdict. Elizabeth was formally charged. Grand fraud, forgery, identity theft. She faced a federal prison sentence, not probation, not a fine, but real prison for several years. Mom was left to live out her days in the ringing silence of our, now hers, large, empty house. She struggled with the weight of remorse that I knew was truly suffocating her. She had lost both daughters, one to prison, the other forever, into the abyss of alienation. The very same preference that had once been the foundation of her world became the instrument of her utter loneliness. I watched from afar, without joy, but also without the former all-consuming rage. A strange, almost clinical detachment took its place. I watched them wander through the ruins they had erected themselves, and it was no longer my problem. I spent the next few days in tedious but healing paperwork, selling the family home, legally dividing all remaining assets, a complete, final divorce from their influence on my life. And then I did what I should have done long ago. I changed my phone number, the one they knew. And I moved to the other side of Seattle, to a modern, bright apartment with huge windows where no one knew my name, my history, or the depth of my scars. The process of deleting old contacts, changing the information in documents, it wasn't a bureaucratic act. It was a ritual of purification, a symbolic burning of bridges that led only to dead ends and traps. I finally realized my loyalty, my sense of duty, had been used as a weapon against me for decades. It was time to reclaim the integrity my father had dreamed of for me. My new life was built on two simple but ironclad principles: radical honesty with myself and a complete refusal to allow anyone to exploit my concept of family. The path to healing, of course, wasn't quick. The trials lasted weeks, but the emotional wounds took much longer to heal. There were nights when I woke up with a phantom pain, as if someone was stabbing me in the back again and again, and that someone was a familiar face. But every morning, I forced myself to remember my choice. I chose self-respect. I chose the truth, no matter how bitter it was, over sweet, suffocating lies for the sake of family peace. I started seeing a therapist, not as a savior, but as a strict trainer, to unlearn the old, deadly habit of sacrificing my needs, my happiness, my safety to satisfy the insatiable demands of those who didn't value my presence one bit. I learned to hear my own voice again and trust it. I finally learned the lesson that should have been the first. My value isn't in how much I can give to others. It's in how tightly I can guard the boundaries of my own life. The silence in my new apartment, where the only sound is the rain outside, turned out to be more valuable than all those approving nods I'd waited in vain for 32 years, from people who never intended to give them. Sometimes I remember that me, the one who trembled behind the marble column, afraid to take a step, afraid to hurt fragile feelings. I barely recognize that woman. I'm different now, colder to deception, harder to betrayal. But at the same time, I feel warmer and kinder towards myself, towards my growth, towards my peace. That day at the bank, it wasn't just a blow. It was an explosion that shattered an old, rotten life. The world where I was just a shadow, an eternal supporting character in someone else's endlessly dramatic play, ceased to exist. And thank God. Now I walk through life with a sense of quiet, unshakable authority. I know my father's legacy is secure. I know my future belongs to me alone. It is not a bargaining chip in someone else's adventures. The main takeaway from this whole story? Kindness shouldn't be blind, and the word family is not an indulgence to trample on your rights. Remember this. Carve it somewhere in your heart. Those who truly love you will never ask you to grind yourself into dust, give up your dreams, or trade away your future to cover for their irresponsibility. Never. True integrity is standing up for the truth, even when it hurts. Even when it means turning away from the people you once considered the most precious thing in your world. Thank you. Thank you so much for walking this painful path to the end and listening to my truth. Sharing this pain was hard, but your listening, your attention, they gave me what I didn't find in my own family, a sense of closure, healing. And now it's so important for me to hear from you. What do you think of my decision to cut all ties? Have you experienced something similar? Please share your stories, your thoughts in the comments below. Let's support each other, because sometimes the strongest family is the one we find through fire.